Let's take a look here and just make sure everything works out. Let's see. Let's make sure everything's sounding good. We're just going to check, see how we sound. Sounds like everything's okay so far. Since everything sounds okay, we're just going to go ahead and get going. We're just going to post this on Twitter, and then we'll be out and rocking and rolling and all those things. So here we go. Just going to find Twitter somewhere. Oh, we all hear Max in the background. He was ready to go as well. Oh boy. Let's see if he does this the entire time. We'll see. Okay. The link is, it was shared. Here we go. Posting it right here. Let's take a look. I think it's posted. All right, perfect. We are currently posted. And here we go. So good afternoon, good evening, good morning, everybody. This is yet another episode of UnShrink Me here on YouTube. And as always, I am Dr. Patrick Lockwood. In this case, I'm just Patrick, so don't sue me or anything fun like that. Unless you really want to, then we can start the cancellation process. But the goal, for those of you who are brand new, of the UnShrink Me podcast every Saturday is just to describe and discuss anything related to mental health. And so we are going to discuss ideas that are useful, not so useful, and somewhere in between, and try to critique them honestly and openly, and hopefully thoughtfully, in such a way that everybody can have a better understanding of whatever is actually happening in the mental health world. So without further delay, I don't want to spend too much time in the intro, but please welcome everyone. And if you are struggling with mental health issues or you need extra support or something like that, feel free to find me on Twitter at AlobhaPatrick, at ALOBHAPATRICK. And I will do my best, if you want to find me in my DMs, to help you find support in your local area. This podcast is not advice for you, so this podcast is not specifically advice for you, just to be clear. Just to be 100% clear. And so, okay. The person in the background that you heard making all this noise is this guy right here. This Maxie guy. This is Max. Max is rather mouthy when he wants something. And so this is the culprit of all of the insanity you were just hearing. But I'm bringing him here so you can see him. And soon he will go back to the door and continue to scream. So again, this is not mental health advice for you as individuals. This is me speaking broadly about ideas that I think either make sense, don't make sense, or somewhere in between. As always, I find ideas from Twitter, talk about them, repost them as we're going along throughout the chat. So please follow me on Twitter at AlobhaPatrick. And we will kind of get the show started. So just one more second. Just one more second. So here we go. Okay. And as always, for those of you who don't know, this podcast is not not sponsored by Celsius. But I do absolutely love this stuff. So today's episode, seconds up. Good to see you, Phil. So we do have a lot to talk about today. There are so many things on the list. And so what we're going to do is we are going to start with lower hanging fruit for those who are brand new. I always like to start with something very straightforward and simple. And after we deal with the simple thing, we move on to more complicated, more nuanced topics. So for today's podcast, I want to start with Dr. Roger McFillin. And I'm going to retweet this real quick. Okay. Here we go. For those of you who don't know, hey, Jonathan, glad to see you're here, dude. It's almost that time, right? So on March 31st of this year, Dr. McFillin, his handle is at DRMCFILLIN, Dr. Roger McFillin, he said, and I quote, "The most dangerous thing about a psychiatric diagnosis isn't the label. It's the story it replaces." So I want to start off with this because I think it's a really good lead in for a couple other things for today. So the thing that I want you all to understand is that it's far more complicated what he said, right? So just to restate what he said, the most dangerous thing about a psychiatric diagnosis isn't the label, it's the story it replaces. And so this could obviously mean thousands of things, but one easy example of this is, for many people, their idea of themselves and their distress and their suffering is that they're ordinary people with ordinary suffering. And then they get a label of some kind, a diagnosis, and then they have extraordinary suffering, or they're broken or special in some unique way because of their illness. And so I think this is most likely exactly what he's talking about, if I were to put some money on it. I can't know because I've never directly spoken with him about it. But what I will tell everyone is this: if you are a patient, if you are a family member of someone who's in treatment, in rehab, in therapy, I want you to understand that most people that are coming to therapy, whether or not they have a label, by the way, but most people that are coming to therapy, actually, genuinely speaking, are not special. It's very much the case that a lot of people have ordinary human suffering, and therapists quasi-ethically put some label on it because they want to bill insurance or something like that, or help the patient make sense of their suffering. But a lot of people that come to therapy don't even have a real valid diagnosis, in the sense that if you really took 3 or 4 looks at it, it really isn't a real diagnostic problem. It's just a variety of psychosocial issues, right? It's something banal like adjustment disorder that feels terrible. And so I want everyone to understand that the story you have in your head that you're an ordinary person with extraordinary discomfort or something like that is usually not true. And so what we need to make sure we do at all times is think extra carefully about the story we have in our heads about ourselves. This is especially important when you're in therapy or in rehab or something. Because if you're an ethical clinician, you try to help people have a realistic and relatively accurate, all things considered story about themselves in their head. But many people go to therapy to find the ways in which they are special in the broken sense of special. And that's crap. And it's not true, because the vast majority of people are literally not especially sick or mentally ill. The vast majority of people in therapy are just ordinary people with malaise who certainly can be helped by therapy, but they're not actually genuinely mentally ill. Someone here in the chat, I don't think we've talked before, so welcome to the chat. Being Me RV, it's all fraud. Therapists are medically diagnosing people just to get paid. That's practicing medicine, actually. Yeah, I mean, that's malpractice in many ways. Now, is it all fraud? I don't know that it's all fraud, but I believe that a lot of people, a lot of clinicians engage in fraudulent behaviors in order to be able to bill insurance and things like that. And to be fair, I can kind of understand why. I'm not saying I do that or I think it's a good idea, but I do understand it because we live in a system that's kind of screwed up. The system is very screwed up, actually, if we want to be super honest about it. The healthcare system, the medical system in the U.S., although it excels at emergency care, it's terrible for chronic care and preventative medicine. And so the problem we face in mental health land, or Rehabistan, or therapy land, the world's worst theme park, is people with suffering would certainly love to help, but they can't, or they don't know how. And there's not a label they can use to bill the insurance. So they just make something up, or they exaggerate something, or they're just ignorant. A lot of therapists are very ignorant. Phil says 13-steppers. Yeah, that happens in rehab all the time. You know, in rehabs, in AA meetings, and NA meetings, and things like that, you know, people 13-step, it's a fake step in AA, by the way, where they have sex with their sponsees or newer people in recovery. That's a problem. So I think we want to be careful of our incentives, right? So dear patients and family members, we want to be extra careful about the incentives we have and focus on when we're trying to help people. Because these incentives, whether it's countertransference or money or all of it, are generally helping patients create a fake story about themselves, an unhelpful story about themselves. Another example of Dr. McFillin's problem is once you're given a psychiatric diagnosis and you see yourself as especially broken or a problem in the world or for yourself, then you've taken what we call the sick role. And I think one of my colleagues here in the chat, Jonathan, might have something to say about the so-called sick role or the identified patient role. And so I want everyone to understand this very straightforwardly. The sick role is a huge problem because once you've identified yourself or a clinician has identified you as the sick person in your life, then now you have a special role to play in your environment. Whereas if you actually read family therapists and family systems theorists of the 70s, 80s, and 90s, it's very clear that there is no one person in your family system that is sick. Everybody is part of the problem. For instance, just to speak to something that's happening literally right now in my life, the reason that cat is screaming at the door right now is because my other half is actually just sitting there. And the cat believes that he will get to go outside because my other half is literally just sitting there. That's a sign, it's a passive sign that the door can be opened and we can go outside and play. It's not the cat's fault. It's not my other half's fault. It's an interaction between the entire ecosystem because there are patterns of behavior, which is every time we come downstairs, the cat is ready and excited to go outside because he's spoiled and he thinks he's going to get what he wants at all times. So all three of us are part of the problem. And that's why this annoying meowing and screaming is happening right now, literally. So it'd be easy to blame one person. One person is the sick person. But in reality, literally the annoying thing that's happening right now is because all three of us are part of the problem. And it's easy to call the cat the problem because he's the most obviously loud and annoying, or to blame my other half or blame myself. But if you just pick one particular person and they're the sick person, you're missing the interaction between players and how these interactions over time have created habits and expectations in people's minds. And once you have a diagnosis in your head and you are the sick person in your family, in your romantic relationship, now you occupy a special place, and the story in your head is you are sick. And that's a problem. That's actually a catastrophic problem in some cases, because if you genuinely are the sick person, then the system will start to accommodate to you and treat you like you're the sick person, which means that the system reinforces how sick you are and doesn't encourage you to grow, doesn't encourage you to act differently, for instance. So it's very important, like quite literally very important, that we understand that the so-called sick role is something people assign to themselves, or sometimes something therapists assign to patients, or both, because that's the connotation of the diagnosis. That's the logical next step because you have a diagnosis. So I hope that makes sense to everyone, and I hope it makes sense to think about everything from the family systems perspective, because once you think of things from the family systems perspective, you don't just look at the individual and how they're broken or stupid or sick or something. You look at how this person is part of dynamic dyads, duos, triads, all this stuff. My colleague Jonathan has just chimed in, and he's got something important to say. He says the IP, and for those of you who don't know, IP stands for identified patient. The IP is the symptom bearer, the one whose behavior speaks aloud about the influences in the family. That's right. So in most cases, the IP is just telling us important information about all the problems that happen in the system, if that makes sense. That's not to say that they are not individually struggling, because two or more things are true at the same time. So that individual is struggling, but secondarily, they're part of problematic systems. So both of those things are true. And the thing about having a diagnostic label or a psychiatric label is it overly emphasizes just how you individually are sick. And that is not the whole story. In many cases, You're not even technically diagnostically ill. Your lazy, stupid, unethical therapist is just giving you a label because they feel like they have to for insurance or whatever it is. So just a little grist for the mill. Story number 1. Thank you, Dr. McFillin, for post number 1. Moving on to my buddy Nick Tabor. Good old Nick. I want to speak to something very generally and then something very specifically that Nick said. So it's very much the case that kids in therapy, kids in treatment get a really terrible interaction with professionals of various kinds. So let me repost one of Nick Tabor's posts. His handle, by the way, is at NICKTABER. And then I'll say more about why I think it's important for our discussion here about boundaries and how to understand the mental health services you're taking advantage of. Okay. Okay. So on this week's episode of UnShrink Me, which is Nick's little inside joke with me about the grist for the mill here. So 6 days ago, here's what Nick said. And I quote, "The core task of youth mental health treatment is self-erasure." Again, here's what he said. "The core task of youth mental health treatment is self-erasure. A child that's developing a self and a backbone produces friction in our child-rearing systems, schools, families, etc. The mental health professional makes the child more convenient to the systems, but wiping the slate clean of who they are and then using their epistemic authority as professionals to characterize the trauma caused as part of an individual defect." So, as always, there are an entire host of things he said, many of which are very scandalous. So I want to start with sentence number 1. The core task of youth mental health treatment is self-erasure. So I've worked in adolescent treatment before in my life, and I loved it because I got to do the opposite of what Nick is talking about. So back when I was a clinician working in adolescent substance use disorder treatment, I tried to do quite literally the opposite of whatever Nick is talking about here. So the adolescents, the teenagers that I got to work with, I wanted to help them become whatever they wanted to become. And we had serious and direct conversations about who they think they are, who they would like to be, and how their drug use behavior fits in between those two things. Very straightforward. Who they think they are, who they would like to be, and how their drug use behavior fits in those two things. Sometimes it conflicts, sometimes it helps. So there are many people in the mental health industry, the so-called industry, who are trying to make kids more compliant. I'm sure that happens a lot. Here in Southern California, I have the good luck of not running into that as much. Not to say that there aren't programs that do that, by the way. So what I will say, is that he's, I think, incorrect when he says the core task of the youth mental health treatment system. I don't believe at all, based upon my very convenient sample life here in California, I don't believe that the core task is erasing the sense of self. I know another very seasoned professional in Missouri, where I'm from, who has been a supervisor at a treatment center, and it's absolutely the case, quite literally the case, that genuinely speaking, when he was supervising a mental health program and a substance use program for teenagers, he was trying to help the counselors develop a more nuanced view of these kids so they could become more themselves as well. So a lot of people I know in the profession actually do a good job of not erasing the sense of self of these kids to help them become more compliant cogs in the machine. Jonathan says, "I chatted with our buddy Ryan Malphus on Thursday, and he and I thought about Nick out loud. Ryan and I agreed that kids should learn to code switch for different contexts. But our intervention... And then Ryan is here in the chat as well. He says, my only job with kids was to figure out what they wanted and how they could get it. The school system also uses manipulation to get compliance. It comes down to the individual performing the services. Correct. So where Nick is incorrect is that some people in the mental health system, especially in schools, are literally trying to make kids comply. Whereas some of us with the spine and ethics are not trying to make kids comply. That's crap. He never talked to you. So Jonathan Godber never talked to you. John's just a liar. He's just a deceitful, terrible liar. I believe it. Just reading the chat right now. Jonathan says, our intervention, Jonathan says, should always take the kids' home context into account. We shouldn't quash what they'll need the moment they walk out the door. We should prepare kids to live better in all their contexts. So ethical mental health providers will always do what Jonathan just said. If you're working with kids or teenagers, your job is to prepare kids to live better in all of the contexts they find themselves in. At home, at school, in sports, at church, at scouts, with friends, wherever you are, the goal is to be not well-adjusted, because that's bullshit language. The goal is to be adaptable across circumstances, which is different than compliant and like silly putty or something like that. So with regard to statement number 1 in Nick's tweet, I think all of us vehemently disagree that that's what we believe is happening. Yeah. So right now in my chat, there are 2 clinicians that are lying about each other and picking fights with each other, which I love, by the way. Statement number 2 that Nick made. A child that's developing a self and a backbone produces friction in our child rearing systems. So let's talk about this statement, because I think this is a really important statement. So if you're out there and you're a parent, if you're out there and you're thinking about having kids, I want you to understand that it is totally normal, and I agree with Nick about this statement, it is completely normal, 100% normal, for a developing adolescent especially to be interacting with the world that produces friction. Because if they're interacting with the world in a way that produces friction, that means they're probably trying to figure out who they are. There's a really good chance. It's not that simple. However, that's a very common reason why adolescents often produce friction in their families, their friendships, their school relationships, their sports, their careers, whatever. Like, kids who are trying to figure themselves out will literally bump and grind up against other people, metaphorically and often literally, to figure out who they are. And so it's very important to let kids have friction. I think if the people who are having teenagers right now could just let their kids figure shit out and get in trouble and figure things out, have values as parents, have boundaries as parents, but also let them figure things out, and don't try to coerce them into becoming something you want them to be, because that's crap. It's actually this simple in some cases. If you're a parent, single parent, 2 parents, whatever, and you have values that actually make your life better as a person and you live by them to the best of your ability, your kid will pick up on that and you won't have to try to coerce them to be a good Christian or a good atheist or a good left-winger or a good right-winger. If you're not a complete and total moron and you actually do believe in the principles and the values that you say you have, and you try to live by them, then that will be appealing to your kid because your life is probably going to be going better. And so it's literally the case, not even metaphorically the case, it's literally the case that if you're actually living according to your values as a person, and your behavior is generally, let's say, 7 out of 10 times congruent with your values as a parent, then there's a very, very, very good chance that you won't have to try hard at all to get your kids to make their bed or find a job or figure out what they want to be in life. And then they can make mistakes and figure it out too. And how beautiful is that when we can make mistakes and figure things out? Ryan says, that's my strategy. It seems to be working well so far. Good. Let them figure things out. It seems like it works. So on point number 2, I think most of us probably agree. On point number 1, I don't think any of us agree about that. Number 3, the mental health professional makes the child more convenient, in parentheses, I'm inserting, like to the world, to the system, to school, but wiping the slate clean of who they are and then using their epistemic authority the clinician's authority, to characterize the trauma caused as part of an individual effect. So that sentence is wildly long and complicated, but the gist is basically clinicians will gaslight kids into being convenient and compliant, and then when they're overwhelmed, they feel like they're helpless or they've lost a piece of themselves, they'll just rationalize because they're the clinician trying to quote unquote help them. Happens sometimes. Does it happen all the time, Nick? I highly doubt it. Does it happen more often than not? I don't know. It's probably situation dependent, probably like specific niche dependent, but it's probably not all mental health therapists in private practice, treatment centers, and so on and so forth. Sometimes it is. School counselors, probably more often than not, unfortunately. So as always, on this week's episode of UnShrink Me, thank you so much, dear Nick, for the grist for the mill. Thank you, as always. And to that point, I want to give Nick a shout out for something that I agree that's both funny and I think accurate. Let me just retweet it real quick. Here we go. So, he said, Nick Tabor, again, said, clinical psychology and psychiatry needs a cigarette label that says, warning, you're handing interpretive authority over your life to a flawed individual and a coercive institution. So, warning, you're handing interpretive authority over to a flawed individual and a coercive institution. So let's be 100% clear that I agree with this. It is the case, it is literally the case, that all clinicians are regular people. We are all just regular people who have a variety of flaws and a host of baggage. Some people have more baggage than others. So the idea that we need a warning is probably, although he's trying to be serious and funny at the same time, I think it's more serious. And so how does this work, dear everyone who's watching and listening? So the warning label, like the cigarette's warning label, that's supposed to come with all therapy. So if you are a patient, if you are a family member of a patient, I want you to hear this, that there already is a warning label that they should be the hearing and seeing and all this stuff, especially in the first session. Excuse me. And so let's talk about what that warning label is. I've talked about this before. However, it's worth reiterating because so many people have gurus for therapists as opposed to actual ethical clinicians. So let me say this again. The warning label that everyone's supposed to get before they start therapy is called informed consent. In pretty much every state, there are laws on the books that state that clinicians have to provide fully informed consent before starting services with patients. So what does it mean to provide fully informed consent? It means a variety of things. So informed consent is not just, I think this therapy can help. Are you okay with giving it a try? That's crap. So informed consent is multi-layered. It includes 6 or 7 really important things. So one thing that should be included in every informed consent conversation at the beginning of therapy and as needed throughout therapy is, first and foremost, what are we actually trying to do, right? So the first thing you should always be asking patients is, what is your goal? Not what do I think as the professional who's amazingly brilliant and smart or something like that, but you, the patient, what do you want to do? Number one, but number 2, what are you willing to do? So that is the most important thing. Probably the utmost most important thing to start informed consent is, what do you want to do and what are you willing to do? What problem are you here to work on? That's number 1. A second thing that's almost equally important is, dear clinician, what do I think will help based upon what you told me in number 1? What are the menu of options of things we can try based upon what you said is the problem you're here to address? Because believe it or not, everybody, there isn't just one way to do therapy. There are actually dozens of things you can try for any given mental health problem. So literally speaking, if you're doing informed consent correctly, step one is always, dear patient, do you know why you're here and what you want to do and what you're willing to do? But then step two is always, here is the menu of things that I think could help. And then step three is, here is why I think they could help, right? So I'm just going to give you a really simple example. If a patient walks into my office, I don't have an office, but if I had an office and a patient walked in and they're like, I have a bunch of anxiety, I don't know what to do with it. I'm like, okay, here are 5 things we could try. And one of them, by the way, is called diaphragmatic breathing. As far as coping skills go, diaphragmatic breathing is probably like the best coping skill. It probably is the most efficacious for the vast majority of people who are extra anxious or stressed. It's like universally useful for like so many different people. However, there are edge cases, there are specific reasons. Like, for instance, if you happen to be a female and you're recently sexually assaulted, expanding your diaphragm might bring up trauma memories. So maybe that's not the best skill for that circumstance, as an easy example. So what I will tell you is the third step of informed consent is always talking about why you think this intervention will actually help. So step one, what are you here to address? What is the problem? Let's be very clear and specific about it. Also, what are you willing to do about it? And what are you not willing to do? Step two, here's the menu of things that I think could help potentially. Step three is, here's why I think these things could help. Here's the mechanism of change as I understand it. It might not apply to you as an individual, but here are the general mechanisms that we understand for change. So by the time you've done steps 1, 2, and 3 correctly, you probably burned 30 minutes if you're doing informed consent correctly. Your entire first session, in my opinion, should have a lot to do with gathering information and creating informed consent. Now, there are other obvious important legal things you have to discuss, right? You have to discuss in informed consent how long you think therapy might go, how many sessions you might do per week or per month or whatever, how much it'll cost, cancellation policies, how to deal with emergencies together, boundaries around those things, because you're setting what we call the therapeutic frame. Another important thing in all therapy is discussing the legal reasons we have to break confidentiality. So confidentiality is one of the most important pieces of a clinical professional relationship. However, and at least in the state of California, there are 4 reasons why all clinicians have to break confidentiality. Child abuse under the age of 18, elder abuse over the age of 65, homicidal ideation with a specifically named victim, plan, means, and intent, and suicidal ideation, where you, the patient, have a specifically stated wish and plan to die, specific means to end your life, and specifically stated intent to die. So those 4 reasons every patient should know. So they understand that part of the frame, the structure of your relationship includes these exceptions for protection purposes because you are a mandated reporter. So everything I've discussed so far, I've listed probably 10 things that have to be discussed in insane amounts of detail if you're an ethical clinician. Now, how many patients get shipped off to rehab, get shipped off to IOP or a sober living, or meet a sponsor or whatever? Like how many people are forced or coerced or convinced to go get help, so to speak, but the person that's helping them never actually has an informed consent conversation. So to be fair to, Nick Tabor's point, therapy should have a warning like a cigarette warning label. And dear Nick, we have it. It's called informed consent. And if it's done correctly, it can take up over half of the first session together. But most people don't do that, unfortunately. I think most people are not trained appropriately to have a full informed consent conversation, which is a shame. because it actually would improve the relationship with the patient. It would bring clarity. And I think a lot of therapists are afraid of clarity because they don't want to be the bad guy or whatever personal motivations. There's a second point to this, which is, as opposed to there being a warning label, our informed consent process is supposed to happen over and over and over again, because as your behavior and your life changes while you're doing therapy or treatment or rehab or whatever, a new problem will show up. Or the same problem will be there, but we try a new intervention, which means we need to have the conversation all over again about what the mechanism of change is, how willing are you to do this thing and try it, what is the problem and how do you understand the problem, and how do I understand how this will help you. So informed consent is supposed to happen over and over again in therapy. It's not supposed to happen just at the beginning. It's supposed to happen every time there's a substantial change. And if you actually respect the patient, and this is the thing that I think Nick is correct about in the anti-psychiatry world, is that a lot of providers do not actually fully respect their patients. A lot of providers dehumanize people, objectify them, or see them as broken, which means they're things to be fixed. That's being objectified again. Which means that you don't have to actually put all that effort into having a full, real professional relationship, because you're just a mechanic working on an engine. And if, by the way, if you're a therapist out there and you're hearing this and you think you're a mechanic working on an engine, then you have a problem. You are the problem in that therapy relationship, because you are dehumanizing your patient. And that is a big problem. It's a huge problem. So, the cigarettes already have a warning label, everybody, just to be clear. There's no missing warning label in therapy. It's just that a lot of people don't do it effectively, in my opinion. So there's some more Nick Tabor ungrist me thoughts for today. Now, on the spicier side, switching gears, quick segue. So I don't talk about this individual very often, but I'm more talking about what he said than who he is, just to be clear. Okay. So Chris Williamson is a very popular YouTuber, podcaster, and he is part of the manosphere or the bro world, the work out and fix your problems that way world, but he's also very interested in philosophy of mind and psychology and all these things. And so his podcast is great. I hope you check out Chris Williamson's podcast if you haven't, because I think he has interesting conversations. Some of them are a little too intellectualized for my taste, because I'm kind of simple. But here's something that he said that I think is really worth considering. And for many people that have mental health problems, this is one of the reasons why the online world is so toxic and a problem. So here's what he said about 5 hours ago. He said, and I quote, "Why so many people throw vitriol around online." And I quote, "The key to understanding most online debates is that a lot of people take joy in being angry. It's their preferred mindset because it makes them feel morally superior to the other side." That's from Morgan Housel, whoever that is. I don't know who that is. Don't care. But the quote's correct. So here's what I said in response. I said about 4 hours ago, many people feel empowered when they're angry and not in other areas of their life or experiencing other feelings. So I want to say something quasi-scandalous, which is the vast majority of people don't know how to feel empowered. I'm going to say that again. If you're to meet the average person walking around here in the United States of America, I would be willing to say that the vast majority of people walking around here in the United States of America do not know how to leverage their internal states to feel empowered. Most people walking around are good at being reactionary or overcompensating with defense mechanisms like grandiosity, projection, denial, splitting, whatever it is. But that's not the same thing as having an active, conscious mindful relationship with your motivational states to be empowered in the moment. So I want to say that again. The vast majority of people walking around do not know how to feel empowered in an adult manner. Most people walking around are reactionary, or they use defense mechanisms like grandiosity, denial, splitting, all this stuff to feel empowered in a pathological way. Club Exile says, not only that, they actively resist empowerment. And that's the other thing we're going to talk about. So what happens online, because we have the safety of hiding behind this, that, or the other, is we're terrible to each other. And we feel, as I said, many people feel empowered. We, the collective royal we, feel empowered when we're angry and when we don't feel empowered in other areas of our life or when we feel other emotions. So imagine you could feel empowered when you feel happy. Or imagine you could feel empowered when you feel sad. Or imagine you could feel a sense of I am capable when you feel other emotions. You can actually do therapy or other kinds of self-training, to feel more empowered when you're in whatever emotional state. And we know this because this happens to Marines, this happens to all soldiers, this happens to various types of people in different corporate settings and trainings and things like that. So there's all sorts of evidence that you can do something to feel more empowered, not narcissistically so, just enough to be motivated to go do the next best thing for yourself, despite how you feel. But a lot of people actually don't want empowerment. Some people want to feel disempowered. Some people want to be victims, right? Some people find a sense of status or being empowered, like resentfully justified and energized when they're a victim, because that's the idea that suits their narrative of themselves. But the other problem with this is some people have such terrible lives. They lack friends who encourage them. They lack family or romantic partners who encourage them. They're lacking in encouragement, that they're desperate for interaction with people that helps them feel empowered. Because to me, the best way to feel empowered from the outside is to get encouragement from people who understand you. But a great many people nowadays are lacking family, friends, and others to help them feel encouraged. So of course it's easier to go online and have parasocial relationships with people, fake relationships, that you can easily navigate and do all sorts of Machiavellian things in and get away with it because I can just put Twitter away and I'll be fine. There's another quote here that I want to address. I guess, is that me, RV, or Merv? I can't tell. Said, and by the way, thank you for being here. Perhaps we are angry for good reason, and without recognition, it has nowhere to go. Especially in the medication harmed community. Absolutely. There are many people that have been harmed by the mental health system who are very angry, and you see them online. And they take that anger out on random strangers all the time. Medical professionals that have never said or done a thing to you, people in the anti-psychiatry or medication harmed community will just pick weird fights with all sorts of people because they're so resentful about the people that hurt them and didn't take them seriously, etc. Another thing that's really important about what you're saying, being me RV or whatever your handle is a lot of people feel very ashamed and guilty that they didn't speak up better for themselves. And so they're actually overcompensating because they felt like they should have spoken up more. And that's true in some cases. So you have to factor that in as well. Ryan says, sadism feels good. And because we're online, we don't have the in-person cues to feel bad for hurting someone. He says, that's my online aggression theory. Of course, many people will enjoy sadistic behavior. Sadism being just taking pleasure or delight in the suffering of others. And we are all, by the way, even the most empathetic and agreeable types, are all programmed by nature to enjoy some degree on a spectrum of 0 to 100. Maybe it's just 1 out of 100. But even if it's just 1%, we are all programmed to enjoy hurting other people. Some people score very high on trait sadism, and some people score very, very low. But even if you score very, very low, there are these rare exceptions where you will enjoy hurting other people, especially if you're getting revenge or you're morally justified. So it's very important for everyone to be clear, and this is my hypothesis. And if you're in therapy or in rehab, I think this applies especially equally to you beyond even the online world. I think people seeking out treatment, if they could figure out how to feel empowered in their relationships, in their family relationships, their friendships, their romantic relationships, their work relationships, if they could just nail down one or two obvious ways, mindsets, habits that will allow them to feel empowered in those ways, they wouldn't be picking stupid fights online. They wouldn't be acting out in treatment or rehab or whatever. As stupid as this sounds, basic assertiveness skills training is wildly effective. It's just that a lot of people don't want to actually be assertive because being assertive means having a different life. If you want to be a victim, if you want to be sadistic, then there's no way that you're going to give a shit about being assertive. Because being assertive means giving up that role that feeds your ego or feeds your sense of righteousness. And there's nothing more dangerous than a person who thinks they're righteous. So for me, I think it's really important to be clear that a lot of people don't actually want to be empowered, as Ryan said. I genuinely believe that it's so much easier to just spread anger and hatred and vitriol and division about politics and Donald Trump and Iran and women and gender and trans and all these things. And it's all crap. It's all crap. It's all terrible that we focus on these things. And if you're justifying it or arguing with me right now, you should just shut up because I don't care. The truth of the matter is you can care about political things, but that just makes you a fool. Because the truth of the matter is, if you looked at your everyday, day-to-day behavior, you're probably not taking good care of yourself. If you're a conservative and you're like, oh, I'm going to save the country, or if you're a lib and you're going to save the country, you're just fucking full of it. Treat yourself better. Have a better relationship with your anger. Have a better relationship with your desire to feel powerful. Have a better relationship with your desire to be empowered. Have a better relationship with your desire to hurt other people and get vengeance on people. If you have a better relationship with all these things, you will shut the fuck up and actually do a better job of living your life, as opposed to focusing on all sorts of crap outside of your life that you cannot control. But see, the problem is most of us didn't come from families where we were taught to focus on what's in our control. Most of us have terrible friends or mediocre friends who are not high agency people who don't know how to actually help themselves feel in control and have agency in the ordinary troubles of their life. Having agency in the ordinary troubles of your life is where you thrive as a person. Caring about this, that, and the other because you can't actually take care of your everyday shit is the problem. Most people, everyday, ordinary people, are cowards. They are terrified of having power in uncomfortable circumstances in their ordinary, everyday life. At the restaurant, with their friends, with their significant other. They're afraid to say, please leave me alone right now. They're afraid to say, I need space. I need love. I need a hug. I need whatever. There's ordinary cowardice that most of us, myself included, by the way, suck at. And so it's really important to be extra, extra clear that the ordinary cowardice we all struggle with, because we had crappy parents or friends or families or mentors or whatever it was, keeps us from actually doing the things that allow us to feel empowered and get our needs met in life. So we do absurd shit like argue with people online or pick fights with the people we love or whatever. And that is the problem. And so anger is actually intoxicating. Anger is sexy. Anger feels good because now I can go yell at somebody because they weren't nice to me as a kid or something like that. There's all sorts of comments here, so I'm just going to take a break. He said, Club Exile said that's also the social cost of assertiveness. Exactly. Ryan says he's cooking. I see the smoke. Thank you. That's what I keep trying. Exactly. Yes, exactly. Jonathan also says, any change is good change. Number 4, any change is uncomfortable, even that which represents improvement. Absolutely. And it's to be like fair about this, it's sometimes terrifying to change because you might see yourself in a way that you can't even fathom, right? Ordinary assertiveness, like I feel sad when you talk to me that way, as a stupid therapy example, is like, that's terrifying for some people because genuinely speaking, to tell someone else that you feel sad is risky. You might have a very ill person that you're in a relationship with and they could hurt you. Or you might have a retarded boss who's going to use it against you and not give you a raise or something or fire you. So it's very important to be clear that I think ordinary cowardice is the correct frame for this conversation. And so because ordinary cowardice is a real thing, of course anger is safer. Anger helps us feel motivated to go deal with something we don't want to deal with. And maybe do it problematically as opposed to assertively. So, back to what Chris Williamson said, just to go back to the quote real quick, because I think it's actually a very good quote, honestly. It's why people throw vitriol around online. And the quote is, the key to understanding most online debates is that a lot of people take joy, that's sadism, in being angry. Their preferred mindset because it makes them the morally superior one. So let's say something about that too. And this is important. If you're in therapy, if you're in couples therapy, if you're in family therapy, if you're in coaching or counseling or Christian counseling or whatever, I really, 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 really want you to hear this. The temptation to see yourself as morally superior is not a small temptation, and it's usually a toxic temptation. It is poisonous to your soul to see yourself as morally superior. And the reason this is a problem is because once we see ourselves as morally superior, we will justify all sorts of evil towards other people. So my encouragement to everyone who is seeking out mental health services, kind of like as a broad scale, I'm not giving you advice thing, but just like my thought is, God, I hope you don't see yourself as morally superior. If you're doing therapy or counseling or coaching or family therapy or couples therapy, it's like we all are pretty flawed. Now, most people aren't outright evil or vicious or something, but some people are. But the vast majority of the time, when we come to family therapy or couples therapy or individual therapy, we need to take account of the fact that because of our ordinary flaws and our ordinary cowardice and our baggage and all this stuff, we're going to act against our morals and our principles. It is impossible, literally, to be like morally pure people. No one is. No one is. It's like literally impossible to be morally pure. Steve Anthony says, tell Israel that. I don't care about Israel. I don't give a shit. I don't give 2 shits or even 3 about Israel and Iran and Gaza and all these things. You know why? Because I am just a regular person and I don't get paid nearly enough to talk about things that I don't do for a living. So I don't care. I don't really care. None of us are morally pure. No country is. No action is. Life is complicated. People's relationships and dynamics are complicated. Pretending we understand anything is absurd and silly. So I don't care about Israel. I don't. But thanks for coming and chatting. Another thing about being morally superior or righteous is that it's a defense against being seen. The more we care about our so-called morals, the less we're willing to be regular people who have regular needs and interests. So really it's a deflection. When people talk about morals, they're really deflecting against being a regular person. And that to me is ordinary cowardice. Trying to rely on your morals is ordinary cowardice, away from authentic existence in the moment. So it's really, really important to have principles and values and morals, but to use them to convince people or whatever is cowardice. So it's really important to understand that this anger, this righteous anger, this reactive anger, resentment-based anger, whatever it is is all a very toxic trap that we should be very careful about, especially if you're in therapy, especially like couples therapy or family therapy. None of us are righteous and none of us are morally superior. Even if you're the least bad person in the relationship, you're still the least bad person in the relationship because we're all bad people, so to speak, if that makes sense. So I want everyone to understand that, like, I'm not saying we should be perfect. I'm not saying we should have no anger. I'm saying you should have the best possible relationship with your anger and the motivations for it, like resentment, moral superiority, sadism, fear of self, fear of closeness, fear of being hurt, all these things. Once you get a handle on that, you can get off your high horse and just be a regular person like the rest of us. And that sucks, because then we're not particularly special. And wouldn't it be awesome if we could just be special? Maybe there are other ways that you can be special. Perhaps. I don't know. So, for whatever it's worth, I hope that makes sense to everyone. And I'd like to end today's conversation. Jeff says, evil is good. I mean, depends on what you mean by evil. I want to end with a quote from my buddy Ed online, Dr. Edward Perrin. He said this back in September of last year, but I should give him a shout out because he's a good dude and he's trying his best to do good shit. Speaking of what we were just talking about, so my buddy Ed, Dr. Perrin is his handle at DoctorPerin, said, healing isn't when the pain stops. It's when the patterns do. Excuse me. So, again, here's the quote. It's a great quote. I think I even said this is super deep. So here's the quote. If you're in therapy, if you're in coaching or counseling, if you're getting sober, if you are a loved one of someone getting better, I want you to hear this loud and clear. Healing is not when the pain stops, as Ed said. Healing is when the patterns stop or change. And the reason I want to end on this is because I think there's a lot of bullshit in the world about how terrible and evil and problematic everything is. And yeah, there's problems in the world, but listen. So many people heal all the time, sometimes vicariously, sometimes through therapy, sometimes through coaching and counseling and rehab and church and scouts and everything, AA, NA, blah, 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 blah. There's just dozens and dozens and dozens of ways that people can live a better life. Healing is when the patterns change. Healing is not when your feelings change. Because even as you're healing, you will still have pain. Like, if you just lost someone that you love and you're grieving, healing from grief does not mean that you no longer have hurt and sadness and longing for that person that's gone. It means that you have a new pattern of managing that hurt and sadness and longing that makes your life better today, not worse. So healing is when the pattern changes to something more adaptive for your day and your future, not when you feel better. Feeling better, in my opinion, is actually extremely overrated. What's underrated is watching the patterns change over time, feeling more empowered because you see that your life can get better today, even though you still feel whatever bad thing that you feel. That is healing. Ed's correct about that. And so I hope that makes sense to everyone. And I hope everyone understands that even though I've been a little spicy today, I'm just saying all this stuff for the sake of making sure that these ideas don't get uncritiqued or left to be overly simplistic. Our motivations are very complicated. Our needs are complicated. Our patterns of behavior are complicated. So please understand, I'm here trying to just showcase some critical thinking out loud. Do with it whatever you want. I'm not here giving you specific advice. I'm just telling you what I think as a talking head, some random dude behind a camera with a blue jacket on. So please don't sue me, or if you really want to, make sure you tweet about it so I can get publicly canceled and make millions of dollars being a podcaster like this. So either sue me or don't sue me, basically. So this has been yet another episode, I think episode 64 of UnShrink Me. Thank you all for being here. Lots of people came out to chat. So lovely to see you all here in the chat, some of my buddies and people I know from Twitter. So thank you all for being here and contributing and making things extra spicy today. The UnShrink Me podcast is hosted on my YouTube channel, The Psychology Checkup. And I am Dr. Patrick Lockwood, a licensed psychologist in California, consultant, professor, blah, blah, blah. I do a bunch of stuff. But my main goal with this podcast every week, just so everyone knows, is that you can get the most out of the mental health services that you're seeking. Whatever change behaviors you're looking to deal with, I'm just trying to make it easier for you in some way with different perspectives. My perspectives. The things that I think are true. Not that you should think are true, things that I think are true. So, I hope this all makes sense. And if you thought this was helpful, provocative, interesting, funny, confusing, or if you just think I'm ugly, please feel free to like, share, and subscribe. And give this podcast to somebody else. Send a YouTube link to somebody else so that more people can get involved in the conversation. Because what I really, truly hope for is that this slowly builds an audience so that more people can get involved and push back on the things that I say. Or if you agree, explain why you agree. I'd love to know what I might be correct about or not. So please like, share, and subscribe. Find me on Twitter at AlobhaPatrick. And I will see you all next week, 3 o'clock, 3:30 Pacific Standard Time. I am unfortunately out of time for today, so no joke for today. I'll have a dad joke for us next week. Very grateful you all came out today. Please eat better, a little bit better every day. Sleep a little bit better every day. Exercise a little bit more every day. And I really hope you take good care of yourselves and the other people that matter.